Welcome back to the Bonsai Builders Podcast. I'm your host, Addison Galambos. In our community, there are many paths to developing skill, and today we're continuing our exploration of the road less traveled, the path of the artist who achieves excellence, but outside of the kind of formal apprenticeship. So I'm thrilled to have Mike Pistello with us today. This is the first time he's on our podcast, but not the first time he's been mentioned. He's a practitioner of bonsai that is acknowledged by multiple professionals across continents. So we'll be talking about his journey, and then we're going to wade into some of the deeper waters, discussing a few of the kind of hot button issues that every serious bonsai practitioner thinks about. So Mike, thank you for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
So I know you've kind of talked about your story and your background on some other podcasts, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I did want you to give us the initial, what's your story in bonsai? Because you do kind of personify the kind of goal of this podcast to some extent, right? A hobbyist who has reached a level of kind of professional acclaim and acknowledgement. So I would love for you to give us kind of that rundown of, you know, how you got to where you were, and maybe highlight the kind of key things that you think helped transform you from just another person doing bonsai to, you know, this really high level of skill.
Sure. So I'll try and give you the Reader's Digest version of this, but essentially my grandfather was involved in bonsai in the early 70s. His first exposure to it, I would say, was during World War II. And he was stationed in Japan, and he got a chance to, I don't know the extent of what he saw, but he saw some kind of bonsai, like in just small numbers in certain people's as he passed through villages and towns. And so then when he came back after the war, he settled in, and then in the early 70s, I believe it was the first Fuji Bonsai Club show, which is a club that's no longer in existence. And it was in Oakland, where all of our shows are, at Lake Merritt at the Garden Center. And it was, I believe, 1971 was the year. So he kind of got started from there, bought his first tree at that show, and then the rest was history. Fast forward to when I was in 7th grade, I was 13 years old and began to take an interest to the bonsai. And just from seeing the trees in his backyard, that was pretty much the only exposure I had, was seeing his trees. There was no bonsai on the internet during that time. There was no Facebook or Instagram or anything like that. So it was just basically the exposure I had through him in books. And so that was pretty much how I got started. And then I just kind of progressed through the years.
That's a very interesting story. I think that's something I've noticed as a commonality. Definitely not maybe a requirement, but a lot of people who have gotten pretty good at bonsai, they started young, or at least their exposure to bonsai was young, right? It's not something that happened right away. It was something that kind of percolated and kind of grew with them.
Yeah, and the thing that actually was beneficial nowadays to the younger folks getting into bonsai that wasn't a benefit for me was there's so much information out there. There's so many teachers that have studied in Japan and have come back and that are passing their knowledge on, that are in the United States and locally to us, and they're accessible. There's so much information on the internet. My journey through bonsai sort of started out, I guess, at a snail's pace, because my learning was via what my grandfather knew, I became a member of a bonsai club, and then just reading books. Now it's Bonsai Focus, but back then it was Bonsai Today and the Sunset magazine. So that's pretty much how I learned. And I would say probably about 15 years ago is kind of the time when bonsai for me started to kick into hyperspeed in terms of learning. Ryan Neal having Mirai Live, a lot of these teachers coming back from Japan. Back when I first started, the only Japanese trained professional that was accessible to me was Kathy Shaner. I mean, that was it. There were some others on the East Coast, but those obviously weren't accessible to me. So, you guys are very fortunate nowadays with all the information that's out there. It's far easier. I shouldn't say easier, because bonsai is tough. It's not easy, but it's definitely a much easier path than I had when I first started.
Yeah. Well, there's the having so much information is awesome. I think the downside is sometimes it leads to us talking a lot more about bonsai than doing bonsai, right?
Right.
There's endless debates, and you know, you're restarting from scratch because you're like, oh, here's this new technique or whatever, right? So you also got to keep focused on, to get good at bonsai, you have to do bonsai. So
100%. And, oh no,
no,
sorry,
no,
go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just wanted to say one last thing about that because what you mentioned made me think about this point too, is that make sure anybody who's learning bonsai nowadays, make sure you vet the people that you're learning it from. And when I say that, Boone put it to me best many years ago when I asked him, like, how do I decide who I want to study with? And he said, well, you know, you want to study with somebody who you get along with, who you enjoy being around, but also who you can look at their trees and see good work. You know, if it's because there's so much misinformation out there now too. So with, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? With all this information that's out there, there's also a lot of incorrect information. So be very careful with who you follow, I guess I should say.
Hmm. That's an interesting
So
topic. So yeah, can you dive a little bit deeper into like, what do you, when you say see their trees and that you see good work, what does that mean? Like you
yeah,
like aesthetically what their tree looks like in the Instagram photo, or like literally the trees in their garden look exactly like what you want your trees to look like? What does that mean?
yeah, that's a really nuanced topic because you really have to decide what aesthetic you're after. Do you want to, you know, there's the nowadays we have more, you know, the more Americanized aesthetic. There's a European aesthetic. There's the Japanese aesthetic. I think a combination of all three is good. I tend to gravitate more towards the Japanese aesthetic. I think that they, in my opinion, do it best. So why not model what I do off of that? But yeah, I mean, look at people's trees. Are they healthy? Is a big thing, right? Because you can't do what you want to do with bonsai. You can't apply all these techniques that we use, you know, wiring, grafting, air layering, pruning back, heavy root reduction, putting trees in small pots that are very limiting for resources. You have to start with health. And if, you know, having a good horticultural background, I think is important. You know, you don't have to have a 4 year degree in it, but you can, I've certainly learned many things over the years. And I think that getting trees healthy, knowing how to keep trees healthy is really the foundation for good bonsai. So look at people's trees. Are they healthy for one? Do they have the aesthetic that you're after? Do you like the work that they do? And then look at the structure that they build. Are the branches, you know, spaghettied and twisted and moved all around? Or can you look under the tree and see a pleasing, really nice aesthetic or nice appearance? So those are all things you can look at, and then you know look about reputation too. I mean, if you know someone who has a great reputation amongst the bonsai community, but there's a lot of different, and this may segue into what we're one of the things we're going to talk about. But there's a lot of people out there, and there's the you know topics of, well, where do you fall? Right? Are you a beginner? Are you intermediate? Are you a advanced practitioner? Are you a professional? Are you a master? Right? And so we could go into all that stuff, in my opinion, of those things as well.
Yeah. So speaking of reputation, I think you're someone who I've personally heard people say very good, like Ryan Neal has said nice things about you, Bjorn has said nice things about you, Peter T has said nice things about you. So, you know, you look at kind of the, you know, the spectrum of maybe even different aesthetics, but, you know, demonstrated mastery in bonsai in the US. And a lot of people are saying, you know, are really appreciative of your work, right? So I'm curious, or to me, that brings up the thought of like, when I was speaking with Bjorn, sorry, one thing I wanted to mention for folks who don't know you is that you have, I've been to your collection and you have a very, very high quality, like a fairly small collection, like I don't know, what, 20 to 40 trees, right?
Yeah, about that. I just go ahead.
But every tree is really, really high quality and beautiful. At the last Pacific Bonsai Expo, a tree that you built from the ground up won a category, right? And so you've
Yes.
demonstrated from a hobbyist perspective, kind of, at least in the US, bonsai, right? I'm sure that you want to go further and there's more that you want to do and accomplish, but like from a like goals as a hobbyist perspective, you've checked a lot of the boxes, right? So I'm wondering what you think about that. And I'm wondering as well, like, Do you think you have some innate talent at bonsai, or how do you think you got there?
Well, first, I do want to give a shout out to those three people that you mentioned. I'm a big fan of all three of their work and have a ton of respect for all three of those men. So that's very humbling to hear them say those things about me. And then also on the tree that I uh, won the award with at the expo, I want to give a credit to Gareth Shepard, who was the one who actually collected that. He's a practitioner out of Santa Cruz area. And I actually purchased a tree from him in 2017, and then rebuilt pretty much the whole thing. I cut back heavily, rebuilt a lot of the branches. So a lot of credit to him for collecting it and getting it started and moving it in a good direction for make my life a little easier with working it. But yeah, it was a ton of work to get it to where it was. And one thing I will say to people that are getting into bonsai, or even current people, whenever I go out and work on my trees, I try to every time I touch a particular tree, I try to make that tree just a tiny bit better. What you don't want to do is work on your tree and then when you're done, go, ooh, I just set that tree back 6 months or a year or 2 years, or hopefully not more than that. But yeah, I think that's a good goal to aspire to, is that every time you work on a tree, you try to improve it. And with that being said, I think that I know when I first started, my first teacher, Jimmy Inadomi, and said something to me that kind of resonated with me. And he'd bring these amazing trees to the club meetings, and I was always like, oh, how do I buy one of those, or how do I get a tree? And he said it's not about money. He goes, you're not ready for those trees yet. And that really stuck with me. And at the time I thought, oh, he's kind of being a jerk. But then after some time and studying with him, I realized that before you can walk, you have to crawl, right? So I think that I see this a lot where people, they get into bonsai and sometimes they have a ton of money, and they're buying, seven, eight, nine, $10,000 plus trees, and they don't really know how to care for them. And that's where I think it's great if you want to hire a bonsai professional. And I know that they love that kind of work, but unfortunately, I've seen it time and time again where these great trees are they're not keeping up with the quality because the folks buying them don't know how to care for them, and they're not hiring a professional. So I would just say be really responsible with bonsai. I take it seriously, and I think that we should have a lot of respect for these trees as well, especially ones that have been in training for decades, because that obviously doesn't happen overnight.
You said something along the lines of like every time you touch a tree, you want it to make sure it gets better, right?
Right.
And something that I struggle a little bit with, and I'm curious what on your thoughts on this are, is like I've only been like actually improving my trees, I'd say, for the last like 3 to 4 years. And something that frustrates me a lot is like sometimes my level of skill in designing or styling a tree in that moment doesn't meet like the pinnacle of what in my mind of what could have been done. Like if Ryan Neal had this tree, he probably would have known to cut this branch that I didn't cut, that I left on the design for another year. And so, but you do the work to the tree and you improve it, but you always think in the back of your mind, like it probably could have been a little better if I had been more locked in, or if I knew this one technique or something like that. So I'm wondering if you feel that way as well. And like, do we have to just say like, hey, it's okay, I'll get another crack at it next year and I'll make those improvements? Or how do you deal with that challenge of like, hey, I made it better, but I could have made it even a little bit better if I was better at doing bonsai, or if I had made the correct decisions in the moment? I'm wondering if that's something that you struggle with at all, or like something you think about.
That's probably one of the most consistent thoughts that I've had over the years in bonsai. And I will go back to your question real quick. I do believe that I have some natural ability. I don't think that, um, since I've never went to Japan and done a formal apprenticeship, I think that to be at at the level I'm at, I do think there's some natural ability there. And I'll give another shout out to a good friend of ours, Sam Tan, who is a guy who's got, let's just say that for his years in bonsai, when I was at that same time on, I was not even close to where he's at. So I'm really excited to see where he goes in the future. But he's got a great start and he's doing wonderful things. But anyway, yeah, I struggle with that because you can do good work, but then you always wonder how would Ryan Neil adjust this? How would, Peter T, or how would Bjorn, or how would Boone, how would they make these adjustments? And when I work a tree, I try to take into account all the tree's positives. And of course, you want to highlight and bring out the positives, and anything that's negative about the tree, either you want to remove it or camouflage it and hide it. And that's why I think a lot of people gravitate towards conifers initially in bonsai, at least because they can hide mistakes a lot easier. Whereas on deciduous, if you're not dialed in, it's when the leaves fall off, everybody can see, well, you're not as good as you thought on that one. But yeah, I do struggle with that. And I think that one way to combat that is to occasionally, my wife actually teases me because I talk about, oh, I'm going to go see Peter once a year, or I'm going to go to have a professional at my house once or twice a year. And she's like, why do you do that when you know how to wire, you know how to work on trees? And it's for the exact reason that you just brought up. It's so if I have a tree that is really special to me, which most of my trees are because I don't have a big collection, I think it's great to bring artists that you respect and collaborate. Like if I have someone come to my house to work with me, I don't just sit there with a drink in my hand and watch them work. Like I'm diving in with them. And it makes me feel better about the styling in the end when I know that, okay, this wasn't just a decision I made on my own. This was a decision that I made with the professional, and we either agreed or we came to a crossroads and we decided to do this or do that. So I would say that's a huge thing. Like I know you go and work with Sam a lot. That's so good for your development, dude, because you can really, you guys can learn from each other, and you can learn from him. And when you're working on a tree, it's two minds instead of one. So I think that's a really good thing, and it supports the people that are back here trying to do bonsai for a living.
Yeah, 100%. That's actually interesting. That's a little bit of an epiphany for me around like to meet these goals as a hobbyist of having an award-winning tree or having a really top quality collection. That can happen in conjunction with a professional. Like you can still build the trees over time, but having someone you respect and who is, has thousands of more hours of experience give you some of those kind of strategic decisions that you'll make in the life of the tree, can be really impactful. And I don't think takes away from, you being the craftsman or the architect of the tree in the back end, and obviously it supports those people. So, that's something that hobbyists can that's a benefit of being a hobbyist versus a professional, right? That can cut down on some of those hours that it takes to reach your goals. Is that you
Right.
can call upon them. Whereas as a professional, it probably is not a good look if if you have to go to another professional to make decisions around trees, like you can't really do that, right? And still at least depending on what level you are in your career, right? But yeah.
Right. Well, and I could say that I think that professionals collaborate with each other as well. I know that on a Mirai live stream several years ago, Ryan had, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank on his name, but he was also an apprentice with Kimura, and he came and visited Ryan's place, and they worked on a tree together on the live stream, which is awesome because you have Ryan's aesthetic, and then you have this gentleman who's 100% the Japanese aesthetic, and they made some great decisions, but there were some decisions where you could tell that it wasn't exactly what Ryan would do, and you could tell that it wasn't exactly what he would do either. So, but it was really neat to see that, and I actually think we should do more of that. Like I would love to, I think like a demo, like having a demo where me and Sam did like a tree together, or Ryan, Neil, and Bjorn did a tree together. Like just imagine like how cool that would be, right? And that tree probably would be better for it, if you have all these different, because different perspectives are good, and sometimes you see things that the other person didn't see, and that's just a good thing in life to think about, to get different perspectives. But
Yeah, I like that thought a lot. I personally am and I get a lot more enjoyment out of doing bonsai with others as opposed to kind of just toiling away solitarily. So, I enjoy
right.
that collaboration process. So, On the innate talent thing, I'm wondering, like from the outside looking in, at least, like I see you as someone who is probably very detail oriented and also like very disciplined, which I think those things like innately line you up to be like those are good characteristics to have for bonsai. But I'm curious
Yeah.
on your thoughts, like, are there specific character traits of yourself or like, you know, a mindset that you have that you think lends itself well to progressing at bonsai, or like what about you do you think there is that makes that innate talent component, or like do you think, oh, I've got a really good eye for design and that's, I'm wondering what are those things that you think helped contribute to your success in bonsai?
I think that I am, like you said, I'm very, very detail oriented. Uh, and I'm my own worst critic. So I'm very critical of my work, and I try to, and that's one of the reasons why I actually hate to do demonstrations, because I can't, a lot of times when I sit and work on a tree, if I like rewire a whole tree, right, and I sit there for 8 hours and work on this tree, most of the time I will go back within that week, say I finished it on a Friday, between that Friday and the following Friday, I'm usually going to go back and make a few small tweaks here and there, because I'll have a chance to have looked at it for a couple days and I'll see things that I didn't immediately notice. And I think that's a great way, because bonsai, when you try to just do it so quickly, it just never turns out so well. And so I think, yeah, being very detail oriented and then being kind of a perfectionist, I think that's what's really pushed me along. I guess if I would have had to say like a negative thing about me in bonsai, is that I'm impatient. And that's probably the worst trait you can have in bonsai, is that because it's a long game. It's not, and I think that my goals for the future moving forward at bonsai is not to necessarily add a ton more trees, but to really step up the level that my trees are currently. And I think that I could talk about every single tree in my collection and tell you the mistakes I've made over the years on it. And obviously talk about the positive things too, but there's certainly things that I wish that I would have done differently on several of my trees. And if I would have done those things 5 years ago, they would be like twice as good of a tree right now.
Yeah, it makes sense. Do you think that your kind of narrow focus in terms of number of trees has also contributed to your success? Like, do you see people who have 200 trees achieve the same success as you as a hobbyist, or do you think that really is a requirement to have a few number of trees if you're trying to have like exhibit level trees?
I don't know that it's a requirement, but I think that unless you're you're retired or you have tons of time on your hands, I don't know how you would maintain several hundred trees as a hobbyist at a high level, and unless you were like completely retired and had no spouse, had no kids, had no life, basically. Because if you have that many trees and if you're doing it as a professional, that's your profession, and that's different, right? Because that's what you do 7 days a week. Or because professionals, bonsai is not you don't get a day off. It's Saturday and Sunday. They still need to be watered, and things need to happen, right? Um, but yeah, I think that if I was going to give advice to someone who's doing bonsai I say hobby, but it's not really a hobby for me. It's a way of life, um, because it's been a part of my life for 32 years, or 33 years now. I'm 46, so yeah. Um, but if you're going to do it as a hobby, I think that, yeah, the smaller collection is better. And I think that as you're starting out, don't your first year of bonsai, you shouldn't be buying a $5,000 tree. In my opinion, it doesn't matter whether you have the money or not. It's just, you should, because you're going to make mistakes and you're going to do things. And it's much better to make those mistakes on material that's $300 or $400, and then on a tree that's 5, 10, 15, $20,000, because you could be literally undoing all the work that's been done for the last 3 or 4 decades. And that's very detrimental. And that is also one of the reasons why bonsai has a hard time progressing in the United States, is because in Japan, there's a lot of reverence and respect for
Mm,
these trees that have been cultivated for decades or even centuries. And I don't see that same level of respect. I do in guys like you and I, right? And Sam and all the, people that are in our circle, but I see a lot of people that just, gosh, this maybe isn't a nice thing to say, but I'm not a professional, so it's okay. But I think more money than brains in bonsai. If that makes sense?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not that they're stupid. These people are smart people. They could learn, but they're just not there yet. It's like you don't just walk into a dojo and become a black belt, right? You have to build on that. And I don't think that those trees are meant for people unless, like I said, you're going to hire a professional. And but then again, it's nice to have a couple trees in your collection. And so when you're ready and you feel like you've kind of gotten better and your skills have progressed, and then maybe add a little bit of a nicer tree. But Dennis Makishima told me something years ago, and he said, don't become a master before you become a beginner. And that one is another one that's always stuck with me. Like
Mm,
people are, I think people are very quick to want to progress to these Pacific Bonsai Expo quality trees. So they want that high level tree, but they have a very low level of experience.
yeah.
And so that's a tough one. I grapple with that on a regular basis, especially when I see good trees that are just gone downhill because of that.
Yeah. I think yeah, it's a little bit of a scary so it's an interesting take that you shared of like, hey, the irreverence maybe from a cultural perspective or maybe from a maturity perspective for the life of the tree kind of holds back the American bonsai scene because we're not seeing these trees perpetuate, right? Which is an interesting
Hmm.
statement. Yeah, that is one of the dark sides of bonsai to me is like so often you sell a tree or you put it in an auction and then you know, it's probably not destined for great things in general,
Yeah.
especially if it's leaving like your circle of people that you know that are serious about bonsai, right? I've heard countless stories of, you sell a tree in an auction and, the guy in the parking lot after the auction is like, "Oh, these are my first trees. What can I keep them
Right.
indoors?" It's like, "Oh man, that's that tree I
Yep.
spent 10 years on and it's going to that, or whatever." So,
Yeah.
that is definitely like a dark side or an unfortunate side of bonsai. But I mean,
Right.
the other side is like, that money is coming into the system and supporting people who are making trees and stuff like that, right? But there definitely
Right.
is a class of tree that is irreplaceable to some extent, right? And so,
For sure.
yeah.
Yep. Totally.
So, one last thing on the learning journey. This is a little bit of a side quest, but I see you as someone who has, you know, top tier professional quality wiring cleanliness. And I'm curious about, for me, that's like the goal in terms of like I see you as a standard for something that people should aim for in terms of their wiring cleanliness. And I always struggle with like, hey, how fast am I progressing towards that standard? And so I was curious on like your perception of, how quickly did you get to that level of wiring cleanliness? Was this like, oh yeah, I got serious about bonsai and then, within 3 years, I kind of got to that level of cleanliness and I've kind of plateaued at that high tier or like how do you what was your path to getting to that level? Please say it was longer than a year because otherwise I'll feel really bad. But
Well, I'm gonna make you feel very good. First of all, thank you for saying that. And yes, way more than a year. I think that I don't know exactly if I had to quantify like a time frame in when like wiring just clicked for me. I don't really know. I think that for me, the way I learn, I'm a very visual learner. And so going to exhibits, going to looking at magazines, going on, and again, I'm just going back to my early years, right? I really studied trees. When I went to exhibits, I would often stand in front of a tree and kind of bend down, look under the tree because I wanted to see the structure. I wanted to see how the branches were made. I wanted to see the wire. And I can always tell when it was good wiring, and the wire, it fit correctly. It was the right size for the branch. There wasn't a bunch of crossing wires. There weren't 4 or 5 wires side by side. It was very cleanly um, and so I tried to model my wiring off of that. And then there's little things you pick up along the way and using, for example, like one wire for two branches kind of a thing, right? But that's not always the case. Sometimes we use one wire for one branch, just depends on the individual branch. But yeah, just um, learning the mechanics of where to place your hands. That's a big one. If you're right-handed, right, you're wiring with your right hand and you're guiding the wire with your left, or vice versa. But being able to having good dexterity in your hands, I think, is good. Also, there's a lot of technique to bending wire. Applying a 4 gauge or a 6 gauge is kind of daunting to a lot of people, and I feel bad. I've done workshops in the past where I get some, and it's usually like the sweetest lady in the world, and she's like this 85-year-old lady, and she's been doing bonsai for years, and it's like, well, we need to put a 6 gauge on that, and it's like, and the poor thing's like, I just can't, and there's limitations, right? And sometimes you just, and that's where you need to, get some help from someone or whatever, um, but yeah, it's a tough one. Wiring is probably, I would say, number one most difficult thing to learn is watering, and I would say that repotting is another one, and wiring is probably those three things are probably. Some people would say grafting, but I think once your technique is there, grafting's not that hard. Cuttings is easy, air layers are easy, but those three things, and you would think watering, oh my God, why is that so hard? I wouldn't even know how to explain why it's so hard, but it's just knowing your trees, and I guess with bonsai, everyone wants this kind of one size fits all answer. Like, when do I water? When do I fertilize? When do I prune? And most good professionals, you will hear them, and their answer to that is typically always, and I think Bjorn said this on your podcast, it depends. It depends on the tree, like when it comes to repotting, right? It depends on the size of the tree, the type of the tree, the stage of development it's in, the species of the tree, and then the soil particles you're going to use, and the anchoring technique that you use, all those things. And if you just know one way, it makes those things very difficult.
Well, it's good to
So,
hear that us mere mortals, if we put in enough work, can reach your level of wiring cleanliness, with continuing to improve at it over time. I thought it was interesting your comment around like looking at trees and wiring and that helping you develop your standard for wiring. I would say in my experience, or for my like learning type, or however you want to define it, like I'm not really able to look at the design of a finished tree in Kokufu or look at the wiring and intuitively connect that to like my physical actions of doing wiring.
mm-hmm.
And that's probably something that people learn over time, or maybe it's also a matter of like as you know more, then you can connect more to what you're doing, right? Like as you have those
Right.
reps, then you're able to see them more in trees. Like I found that with like Shohin junipers when I went on a trip to Japan. Maybe my first like 4 trips, I wasn't able to like intuit anything about their making them. But after I'd gotten some experience with trying to make them, I was suddenly able to start picking out a few things like, oh, they grew it to this thickness before they added shari, or
Right.
they wired the branches in this way, or those types of things you start to be able to grasp. But I would say like the actual wiring process, I'm still not able to necessarily like look at the exhibition wiring and then connect that to rules like, oh, maybe always cross behind the trunk instead of in front of the trunk if you're doing exhibition wiring or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So those are
And
tough.
that's a good point that you bring up too, because there are many different, um, I don't want to say styles of wiring, but there's you wire differently depending on what your goal is. So if it's let's just say it's a Sierra juniper that you have collected, it's been sitting in your yard for 2 years getting healthy, and now it's time for its first styling. So this is a tree that's several hundred years old, never been touched by man before, and now here you go, right? So there's that initial wiring is going to be more structural. It's going to be, yes, you want to lay out the pads, and you should always strive for, even in that first styling, to have a nice silhouette, but you may not, in certain branches, you may leave a little longer because you need them to grow out or to thicken. And then so that's like your first initial touch, right? And then there's once that tree sets in place and the structural branches are set, Now you get into the secondary, tertiary type wiring, right? Where you're doing more refinement for pad work. You're starting to break up pads, whereas maybe in your first styling you had one large pad. Now you break that large pad up into two or three smaller pads to give more depth, more interest to the tree. And that wiring is another type of wiring. And then there's exhibit wiring, where if you, yes, can you have every single branch wired in the exhibit? You can if it looks nice, but there's little nuances to that, right? You don't want to do that wiring a week before the show, because all that wire is going to copper wire. As you bend it, the annealing falls off, and now you have this bright wire, and you can see it very plainly in the exhibit. So you have to think, if I'm going to put this tree in the exhibit, then I want to wire it 2 or 3 months before, so that wire has a chance to oxidize, kind of blends in with the bark. You don't see it as much. And you also want to have a lot less, right? You want to try and, you know, if you can put one larger piece of wire and level out a pad, that's better than putting um, 20 different pieces of wire on that pad. If you can get the same result with just one piece of wire, and you can, if you know what you're doing, and you're just trying to reset pads and get things looking perfect for the exhibit, you can do that. And so there's all these different.
Yeah,
Bonsai
yeah.
is very much like a martial art. Like, you start at white belt and you get up to, fifth, sixth, seventh degree black belt, and a lot of the techniques build on each other. Like, if you don't know how to do one type of wiring, it's hard to be able to know how to do the other type.
Yeah. There's always another level to the game, essentially, where,
Yes, yes,
you do, there's a very big difference between functional and correct, right?
right.
Or like optimal for the situation. So I wanted to transition a little bit to ask you kind of something related in that, what does mastery mean for you in bonsai? Because we don't really have, like in Japan, they have, kind of, you've got apprentices, and then you've got, you know, bonsai masters. After you've gotten your certificate, you're officially licensed. We don't really have the same. I mean, we have professionals and non-professionals, I guess, in the US, but I'm curious, like, because some people would call you a master, right? And so I'm curious, whether you think you've reached that level, and like, what is the requirement for reaching that level?
First of all, I'm not a master. And secondly, I don't think I'm even close to that level. I think that in order to achieve that level, you have to you have to dedicate a good portion of your life. So I don't know that just because, and this might be a little controversial, but it's okay. I think I'm known for that. Just because someone studied for 5 years in Japan doesn't always necessarily just automatically mean they're a master, at least in my eyes, because I've come across professionals in my day who I personally think I could style a tree better than. And we'll keep those people nameless, of course. But then there's professionals who I couldn't hold a candle to. I just think that it's a combination of things. I'll throw a name out there that you may have heard of, but his name is Mario Comsta, and he's from Spain. Studied at Taiga Yoshibata's nursery. You would know the name probably better than
Taisho
Taishoen. Correct, yes.
with
But
did he study with his father, with Taiga's father, or
he studied with Taiga's father, yes,
it?
and so, but I think that, if you look at the trees, I mean, I've never been to that nursery, but I've seen them online, and they're very, very well done, right? Incredible, incredible work. And but I think that in order to achieve mastery, right, you have to be able to do everything well. Not just, I'm really good at wiring or I'm really good at grafting. Like, to me, a master can wire, they can graft, they know about display, they know about proper horticulture, they can grow a tree from seed, they can grow a tree from cutting, they can do it from an air layer, they can take a collected tree and do a raw styling and make it look good. They know how to carve deadwood correctly. You know what I mean? Like, or they specialize in something. Like, there's nurseries in Japan that specialize in deciduous, right? And those masters are masters of that type of bonsai, right? They may not be the incredible, they may not do the incredible work on a juniper, but they their work on a beech or a trident maple is absolutely pristine. So master's a tough one. I think that it should be reserved for very special people. And I don't think it should be just thrown around because I think it takes away from the meaning. Now, do I think there are a lot of professionals? Yes. I think that people do professional level work. But in terms of mastery, I think that takes years. I don't think that you go do an apprenticeship and that just means voila, I'm a master. It means it's kind of like college, right? You go to college and say you become a lawyer, right? Just because you went to school, got your law degree, your JD, doesn't just mean that as soon as you pass the bar, you're going to be this excellent trial lawyer. Like that's something you have to go and prove yourself, and you have the foundation. I think anybody who goes to Japan and studies has a solid foundation. But then what you do with it from there is what really starts to take you from the professional level to a master level.
Mm.
And I don't think everyone that studies in Japan has necessarily moved to that level, or maybe they're working towards it and they just don't have the years on, right? Like in my profession, 25 years as a police officer, I was not as good a cop with a year on as I am now. So I think that that's something that people really need to be careful about when I go to shows. It's like, oh, here's this demonstrator. Oh, they're a master. It's like, well, I don't know about that. you know,
I like that idea of there being like a commitment to the pursuit associated with mastery. Like not on like you could be as good as a master, but if you're not like making it a pursuit and like pursuing the increase in your capabilities over time,
right.
then maybe you're not a master, right? So like, and then I also think that the breadth component is interesting. So you're saying it's not just how deep are you, like can you style a juniper, but do you show competence across like a number of disciplines, like interrelated disciplines like display and deciduous
right.
and yada yada, which is interesting to meet that like mastery bar. And then also it
right.
sounds like to you there's a time component, right? Where it's like you can have the skills and you can have the commitment, but you also have to demonstrate it over a long period of time, right? It can't just be like, hey, I just finished my apprenticeship last year, I'm a master. It's like, okay, show that
right.
sustained output of, the top level of material. Do you
right.
think you have to contribute something new to bonsai to be a master? Like, do you think you have to exceed your teacher to some extent? Like, do you think you have to add something new to, like in terms of display or work on different type of trees, or like, does your work have to be better than your teachers for you to demonstrate mastery?
I don't know that it has to be better, and I don't know that you have to necessarily bring some new technique to bonsai, but I think that certainly, if you're, say, become better than your teacher, right, that certainly speaks volumes for your teacher, for one, because they didn't hold back. They taught you everything they know, and you were a good pupil. You learned, and now you became better than them. So yeah, I think that speaks a lot for the artist, but it also speaks a lot for the professional or the master who taught them, because it's not everyone is a good teacher. So you could be a master in Japan and you may not know how to teach that brand new person everything so that's a skill in and of itself, I think. Yeah, and I think there's just a lot of different levels. I mean, there's master, that's like the highest, right? And then there's the professional, which is the person who went to school, they went to Japan, they studied, they came back, and now they're doing it as a profession and they're doing it daily. But I will say, I don't necessarily think that just because you didn't go to Japan, it doesn't mean you can't be. Like, you take people like myself or like Sergio Kwan and back east, or in the Bay Area, Rick Trum, somebody who does excellent work. These are people who have never done an apprenticeship in Japan, but in my opinion, do very high level work. And so I don't think that just because you didn't go to Japan, you can never gain the title of professional. I think that you absolutely can. But again, if you go to Japan, you get that leg up, and you get the leg up not just with the repetitions, but you get the leg up on the culture. You learn the Japanese culture. You learn that reverence and that appreciate and that high level of competence and to appreciate the work that goes into these trees that you may not get here if you never do an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, that being said, like I would put, like, I think there's, master, there's professional, there's an advanced practitioner. And I think I fall sort of in that range. Then there's kind of a intermediate and a beginner. And then there's like the person just starting out. So I don't put myself at a professional level. I put myself at an advanced practitioner level, and that's only because I don't do this for a living. I think that if I did it for a living and I was pumping out and working on 100 trees a month, I think my skills would vastly improve. But there's always room to learn. There's always room for improvement, no matter whether you're a 5-year bonsai person or a 50-year. I learn something new all the time. I'm always in my trees teach me new things all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Bonsai is something that there's so much depth to it. So anybody claiming to know everything is, they're lying.
Yeah, 100%.
There's so much depth and there's always another level deeper to go and an improvement to the game. So anyone calling themselves a master is either, it's self-evident that they are, or,
Right.
or they're, they're pulling your leg, which is interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like I mean, it's not, it's more of like I'm just curious about your definition of mastery. And, it's very cool to hear like what someone at that, as I guess you would describe the advanced practitioner level sees as the next levels to the game. I think it's a good perspective for folks to get, especially as you're starting out, to know like, hey, the levels go pretty high here, right? There's a lot you can dedicate yourself to if you want to. Like reaching mastery is not something to take lightly. It really takes a big commitment.
No, it takes a huge commitment, and I think it takes a lifetime. I mean, again, you don't have to be 80 to be a master, but it takes a ton of experience and a ton of just working knowledge and pumping out the trees that garner the respect of many, right? So
Yeah.
there's a reason why people look at Masahiko Kimura or Shinji Suzuki or Taiga Yoshibata. There's so many others, but just to name a few, right? And there's a reason that they look at them, because not only do those guys have a incredible handle on bonsai, but they pump out trees that are absolutely incredible. And that's a big one for me. And that's why here in the States, when I look at people, well, not anymore because Bjorn moved to Japan, but when I look at people like Bjorn or Ryan or Peter T or Boone, I've seen them produce incredible trees. So it's easy for me to look at them and say, okay, those guys are very high level professionals, potentially masters either now or in the very near future, right? Because they're proving it. They've proven themselves. They're tried and tested. They're battle veterans, and so that's kind of what makes them who they are, I think.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, have you ever thought about kind of, after you retire or in an early retirement, making a shift to trying to push towards mastery in bonsai, or like being a professional in bonsai? Is that something that you're like, it's tickling your fancy a little bit, or is it something you like, you're happy with the level that you're at in bonsai? Like, how do you think of it for your own personal?
Well, I'm never happy at the level that I'm at. You should never be satisfied. You should always be striving for a higher level, right? And so, I'm always going to be striving for more. I think that, let's just put it this way. I think that when I retire and my son is a little bit older, I think you'll see a lot more of me in the bonsai community and in doing work. And I would like to push towards that. I think that would be what a great retirement gig, right? To be able to just work out of my house and produce great trees. And so I think that that's 100% probably the retirement gig that I would like to do. It's just my other thing is that I don't want to take business away from people that are, trying to do it as a profession, who are, don't have a pension like I do, right? So that's that's kind of why I've actually taken made a decision to take a back seat to
Mm,
just to do bonsai in my backyard. And it's a reason why I'm not doing demos anymore. I'm not teaching at my house. I'm not doing classes or anything, because I think that should be, I think people should pay money to the people that are doing this as a job and that need that money to put food on the table. I have a job. I don't need to do that. It's cool to make money and be able to use that to buy some trees here and there, but I really want to focus on my own stuff and let the professionals who are doing it for a living really flourish. And I think that'll maybe open some doors for me when I retire too, with a lot of these professionals, knowing that, because I know that if I was doing it for a living and somebody who's making, a good salary every year is now coming in and undercutting me and taking business away, like I'd be pissed. I'd be frustrated.
yeah, for sure. Well, hopefully the market's big enough to sustain both. I mean, I struggle with that
Yeah.
too because like I don't have any intention of doing bonsai professionally, but I do want to have professional level skills, right? And so there is
Right.
there is value, I think, in taking paid client work. Like maybe you don't have to do a prolific amount of it, but I have found
Right.
at least that like the pressure of client work and the different experiences and exposure to different types of trees that you might have not chosen for yourself does push you to improve, right? So I think as a hobbyist there is value in taking paid work, but I think you're
Hmm.
right to err on the side of getting better as a hobbyist comes from having this support structure of professionals who do it full time, helping you grow. And so we have to make sure that they're supported as well, right? You can't undercut those people. So there's probably a like respectful and sustainable way to still get those reps, um,
A
or
hundred
just work
percent.
at
And
their gardens for free or whatever.
yeah, 100%. And your point about working on trees for people of client work is, I mean, it's gotten me a ton of experience because, earlier, I don't really do it as much or at all anymore, but I had several people that I worked on a lot of their trees for them. And that got me a lot of reps that I wouldn't necessarily have gotten just with my small collection, right? And I also will give a shout out to, he's passed away now, but a really big part of my bonsai journey was Johnny Uchida, who owned Groveway Nursery in Hayward. And Johnny was his talent really lies in landscape architecture. Bonsai was more of a secondary thing for him, and he was more of a bonsai ambassador and a bonsai seller, selling trees, moving product. Where he really made his money was in landscape architecture, though. But what was so great about him was Johnny was a very humble man, and he recognized that his ability was limited. And as I started to get better in bonsai, he gave me so much opportunity to come and work on his trees. And he would try to pay me. I would never accept it. Sometimes he would just shove the money in my pocket, wouldn't let me walk out without it. But I mean, I really just I was getting a chance to work on trees that I couldn't frankly afford. And it gave me that level of respect because I knew that they weren't my trees. So I couldn't half-ass it. I had to I had to put my best foot forward. But I also got that great experience. And if not for him, I would probably not be where I'm at today. So big shout out to Johnny. Really miss him. He's a great man and a great friend. And I think that he did a lot for the art of bonsai, in terms of just pushing it, the art to different people of different ages and teaching at the adult school in Hayward and all
Yep.
that stuff. So
Yep. Whenever I first moved out here, that I went to Groveway Nursery and bought some of my
yeah,
first trees. So the
yeah,
Bay Area definitely misses him and his contribution in the garden and his, in Groveway. So,
for sure.
well, let's hope that we can all be the next stewards, of the next generation to have that experience. So I know you have to
Yeah.
go in a few minutes, but I wanted to leave the floor open to any topics that we didn't kind of dive into that you want to call out in the last few minutes here.
No, I think we talked about some good stuff. We got a lot of it out there, and I guess what I would say for people that are doing bonsai is don't look at a tree and say, oh, it's good enough, or always strive to improve and really take the advice from professionals when they give it to you. And then when professionals do work on your trees, bring them back. Like for example, if I'm working on a tree with Peter, I try to keep that tree in the family, so to speak, right? Like I'm not going to have another person work on it per se, unless I'm not happy with it. But I mean, shout out to Peter. I've never been disappointed even for a second with anything he's ever done or showed me. But I have had that feeling with other professionals. And so I think that if you have a special tree, you have a tree you choose, like if you choose to work on a tree with me, then and you like the work that I'm doing, then let me keep working it. Don't take it to someone else because they're going to have a different view on it, right? So if Ryan Neal's your guy and that's who you want to go to, or if you like Ryan and you like Peter, then you know pick out trees you want Ryan to work on, pick out trees you want Peter to work on. Keep those trees with those guys. Don't intermingle them. I think is the best advice I could give, and because I
That's
think
really
you'll
good
be happy.
advice, I think. That's really good
Yeah, I
advice.
think because everybody has their own way of doing things, right? I mean, I think that you work with Sam a lot, and Sam does incredible stuff, and I think that if you're working a tree with Sam, keep it in the family and keep working it with Sam. And then, look for the professionals that embody like the things that you like. So if you're a deciduous guy, I mean, gosh, I can't think of a better deciduous guy in the Bay Area than Peter. I mean, he's great. Does great conifer work too, but at the end of the day, he does great. So maybe that's the guy you go to. When I think of collected Yamadori and getting trees the bones and the structure they need and moving them into a high level tree, I think of Ryan Neal. I if I had a piece of Yamadori that I was absolutely in love with, I couldn't think of another person that I'd rather have style that tree. And then you have someone like Mario or Bjorn who they're very clean in their work. Their aesthetic is good. Their trees are always healthy looking. They're always container and tree matched. I mean, I could say so many good things about all these guys, and a lot of it crosses over with these people too. But no, I mean, you have Adam Toth in the Bay Area who's really trying to make a move and towards Shohin, and I think that's a smart thing. I mean, he's developing a niche for himself, and I think that is going to make him in very high demand because there's not a lot of people that specifically focus on Shohin.
Yeah.
And so I
I've
think
been
I
really
think that was
impressed
a
with his practice, and I think we're already seeing Shohin up level in the Bay Area. Like the EBBS
yeah
club has been working a lot with Adam, and like the Shohin are
yeah
looking great. I think we're gonna see some better Shohin in PBE for the next one. A lot due to Adam's work with a lot of folks.
Yeah, so I say, exploit these guys. I mean, lean into them, learn all you can from them. And I think what's made me so well-rounded over the years is that I haven't, I have particular people that I want to work with, but I've tried to take the pros and cons from a lot of these different folks, and if there's something that I like, I keep that. If there's something I don't like, I just put that over here, and I do that with all these different professionals. And so I sort of look at myself as kind of just a bonsai mutt, I guess. Just,
Yeah, yeah.
I pull pieces of knowledge from different people and different aesthetics from different people, and I try to just
You gotta make your own
combine that all.
decisions on what that combines to be for your taste, right? So
Exactly. Totally.
that I mean that's a big can of worms. So we might not have time to get into it this time, but high level, I've multiple professionals have told me on the podcast like, hey, you need to choose one and stick with it to get better at bonsai quickly. So that you kind of contrast that with like me and you, it sounds like have similar approaches of like, hey, let's lean into areas that like we really vibe with a certain professional's approach to this species or that place in the bonsai development process and like learn from them and then make some critical decisions on our side of like what we want to apply and don't want to apply. So, any quick words on that around like
Yeah, I can talk on that for a little bit. I think that I'll clarify that by saying that when you're new in bonsai, I do think it's smart to pick one particular person that you gain your foundation, your core knowledge from. I think that once you hit kind of the more intermediate level, I think that's when you can start to get branch off and get different perspectives from other professionals. But I do think there's totally a ton of benefit, because if you're new, right, and you don't know what's bad and what's good, then by getting 20 different professionals' inputs, it's going to muddy the waters for sure. So those professionals that have said that, I don't think they're wrong. I think they're spot on. I think that it's just a matter of, you know, like now at the level I'm at, if someone said, "Oh, you should only be if you're going to have a professional come over, it should only be this one particular one. Pick one and that's it." I don't think that that's how it has to be for me, but I think that
Well, and you have a depth of experience that's contextual to
right,
your area that lets you, you know how to adjust professionals' techniques and timings to your climate. So you can decide
right,
like, oh, like if I'm going to do the first styling in this manner on this type of tree, like
hmm
I can adjust that to my area. So you have a little bit of knowledge to be able to do that. Cool.
yeah,
Yeah, makes
totally,
sense.
totally. And again, just pick people that you and the other part about it is you want to have somebody who's got a compatible personality. You don't want to work with a professional who you don't enjoy being around, right? Or
Yeah.
who's not nice to you, or whatever. Like, for example, if you're in Japan and you're doing an apprenticeship, then hey, it's you get what you get. It is what it is, right? But if you're here in the United States and I'm paying you $700 or $800 for a day to come, I don't expect you to be a dickhead to me. I don't expect us to not get along. I expect us to,
Have
have a fun
fun. Yeah.
time. Part of it's the experience, right? Like you said, you enjoy doing bonsai with friends, with people. I don't, why would I want to pay someone who I don't enjoy being around? It just makes no sense.
Totally.
Um, and if that was the case and I just really love their work, then I would just pay them and I'd say, just take the tree and bring it back to me when you're done,
Yeah.
but what would be the point of hanging out with them all day long?
Yeah. The downside is all these bonsai people are so cool. So
Yeah, exactly. We're most of the bonsai community are very good people. I've not come across too many people that are not good folks and to do bonsai. So
yeah.
that's a nice thing.
Yeah. Well, Mike, this was a blast. I think we had a lot of kind of meaty discussions here. So I'm curious for those listening, feel free to message me at Teeny Trees on Instagram and kind of weigh in on some of these topics. Mike, where can they see your work or reach out to you if they want to connect?
Yeah, so on my Instagram, Bonsai Mike, and also on Facebook, you can see my work. I do post probably more on Instagram, but since it's all connected now with Facebook and all that, it goes automatically to that anyway. So, but yeah, check me out. Always would love to get some more followers. Trying to reach that 10,000 mark, but
Oh, wow. That would
still
be awesome.
still quite a ways away, but maybe we'll get there after these podcasts when
Yeah,
people
10,000
listening.
followers. I heard that's mastery level. So I just tease it. All right.
I
Well,
think
thank you.
I think that's when you start to get paid for your posts is after
Okay,
10,000.
okay.
So that'll be good. So anyway,
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate you taking the time. I'm sure people are going to enjoy this. So thanks so much. Yeah, hopefully see you soon.
yeah, thanks so much for having me, and look forward to seeing you as well.